Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on a special edition of the Hinckley Report. Once a national leader, Utah has seen lower voter turnout for decades. What is at the root of this decline? And what have state and local leaders done to increase civic engagement? In 2018, Utah followed the national trend and saw a historic turnout. What motivated citizens to vote? How did this affect candidates and propositions? And what needs to be done to keep Utahns engaged? Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Spencer Cox, Lieutenant Governor of the state of Utah, Natalie Gochnour, director of the Kem C Gardner Policy Institute, and Michelle Quist, political commentator. So glad to have you all here today talking about a very special edition of voter turnout. We're going to talk all about voter turnout today here in the state, what's happened, and we have experts here. And you're in charge of that particular part of the state, Lieutenant Governor.
I mean, in theory, yes. Yes.
So let's talk for a moment, because there are a lot of good things that happened in this election in terms of turnout. Maybe let's all talk about this for a minute. What went right?
Well, what went right is voter turnout. People came out in near, at least in recent history, in record numbers, and we're very excited about that. We saw them turn out. We had a couple things, again, having it mostly vote by mail, we think really helped people get their ballots in and decide to participate. And then having same-day voter registration across the state. The first time in the history of our state, you could actually show up on election day and vote. And for those people, that fear of missing out, I think, got to many of them. And we had long lines, which was a good thing, something we want to avoid in the future. But it meant a lot to see people showing up.
Yeah, those are all really great things. We have to break down some of those. Go ahead.
The mail-in ballots
Michelle.
are great. I think as a candidate, I was surprised at how many voters called me doing their research. One of them said, I've got a list of 8 that I'm going through. They go through and they call and they do their research, and I think it helps them engage. I think that helps the turnout. Not necessarily that, also that it's easier to just mail in, but they get to do their research and question and study it out before. I think that really helps a lot.
Natalie, it's interesting because you've worked with campaigns, you advise campaigns, lots of people over a period of time. It used to be, before we had these mail-in ballots, that people do a lot of time waiting. There were negative things that would come out at the end, and candidates didn't really know when they needed to time things, right? But now they got to start timing things almost immediately. Tell us how that's working with the candidates.
Well, it's like a constant campaign. Even without that, right? Because we just have a sentiment these days where there's a lot of disillusionment in Washington about Washington, D.C. I think the real thing that made this turnout happen was the propositions. There were some competitive races, so to speak, competitive propositions. I think people really knew that they needed to turn out to have their voice be heard. And of course, we've seen that with some close elections, even some that have been too difficult to call. But I think mostly it was the people speaking out. They wanted to vote on medical marijuana. They wanted to vote on Medicaid expansion. They wanted to have their say on funding for schools. And they wanted to, vote for their candidate of choice.
Yeah.
What were you hearing about the efforts for mail-in ballots this year, Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, so again, mostly positive. And I appreciate what Michelle said, because that is so true, that this was one of the most complicated ballots we've ever had. Even people that kind of know this stuff got their ballots and said, wait, there's 3 constitutional amendments.
Right, and I'd only heard about one.
Right, I only knew about one. So where did this come from?
Long.
So it gave people an opportunity to engage. Our website got more hits than ever before, as people were looking to get the information and to be drawn out. And there's lots of different reasons. Of course, the national atmosphere, I think, right now is leading to people wanting to participate. They have strong feelings. They want to be more engaged. And the real reason were the ads that my office did. I know that's the real reason that people showed up to vote.
Those were really great.
Right? No.
They're great. They were good.
They were good ads.
But all it takes is one issue that speaks to your heart, and you're there. And so there were a lot of things to speak to your heart, whether it was something to do with patients suffering and, medical marijuana, or maybe you were really interested in seeing the mayor of Salt Lake County, who's had a track record that's really impressive. You wanted to go up and show up for him. A lot of people wanted to see, Congresswoman Love stay in office. So there was a reason for almost everybody to be there.
I want to talk about some of those numbers for just a moment, because of course we polled on this, because when you start talking about voter turnout, it's really important to talk about the motivation. Why would people turn out? And so we polled the state of Utah, and 30% of Utahns said they were going to show up for a proposition. And of course, of those, it was largely for Proposition 2 on medical marijuana. In fact, 69% of those said that. After that, we have national candidates, but we also have a candidate locally. 23% said they're going to show up for a candidate, and in this case, most of them were showing up for Mitt Romney. Is this a unique thing in your mind, Lieutenant Governor, that we have so many propositions that are motivating people and at least a couple of popular candidates? Is that unique to us, or is that, you think that was what was driving some of this?
Yeah, it definitely was driving it. I mean, there are lots of different reasons. It's hard to pinpoint any one, but this is really interesting data. We haven't seen propositions like that on the ballot here in the state of Utah for a long time. It's very rare to even have one. So to have three, I think, really changed the atmosphere around that. A lot of money was spent gathering signatures, getting people. So that got people interested a year ago as they started the signature gathering process. So people are now looking forward to it, again, for a midterm, which is really rare. And so I do believe that was a big piece of what was driving the interest.
Okay.
What's unique in Utah, in my opinion, is that the ballot initiatives. Sorry, I just lost my words there. That they actually won, a few of them won, and yet only a few incumbents lost their seats. So you'd think that by voting for Medicaid or voting for the medical marijuana, that the message was, legislature, you're not doing what we want, and yet only a few incumbents lost. And so that's kind of a disconnect, a unique thing in Utah. We want to be kind and nice, and we don't want you to lose your seat, but we want you to do what we've been talking about for 2 years. So I think that's a little bit unique.
It's the Utah way. We're a little passive aggressive.
Right.
We're going to show you, but
exactly
we'll
right.
But I think it does
exactly
point
right.
to there is a change out there. This is just my opinion, but I think I'd like to think of inflection points. And so I look at what's happening in the Utah economy, Utah demographics. We're diversifying. We're growing, which is another code for we're bringing people in, lots of in-migration. We have, we've talked about it, but this disillusionment with what's happening in Washington, D.C., so that affects people. And then you've got these sentiments of the millennials, and they're different. And they're going to demand more open government. They're going to demand more responsive government. It's got to be more convenient government. And so even though I think a lot of incumbents were reelected, I think there's change in the air. And I don't think we're at the inflection point, but I think we're approaching it, where it's a different Utah.
What have you seen this election in terms of numbers, if you have them, but or otherwise your sense, young people registering to vote and then showing up?
Yeah, so we don't have a demographic breakdown yet. We will be working on that, and we'll get those numbers out. I suspect, and as I visited lots of polling locations on election day, there were a lot of young people showing up, and hearing the millennials starting to turn out feel that that's important. What most people don't realize is they are demographically the largest voting bloc in the state of Utah right now. They just don't show up historically.
And that's not true in all states.
Right.
Just to make that clear. So the millennial population is larger than the baby boom population in our state, and so that's part of this inflection point.
We started talking a bit about the signatures on the proposition. Certainly got people engaged kind of early. But Michelle, let's talk for a second about even the impacts of Count My Vote, right? Where people are starting to get signatures in that particular category to get on the ballot.
Right.
So we can't talk about great voter turnout now without talking about how some of that has impacted it negatively in the past. Talk about how that has changed people's engagement in the process.
Well, before Count My Vote, there was a lot of negative. There's one party's in control. My vote won't matter. Nothing. It doesn't matter if I show up because I'm not in the majority or whatever. Count My Vote has opened up the process. It has opened up to more candidates, and it has made it longer. The voters are engaged from the signature stage, and so they're peaked there, and they're still watching as it goes along. So I think it has helped people be engaged more, and I think it has helped have different candidates.
It's all about choice and competition, right? You want the voting public to have more choices,
right?
and you want candidates to compete in the marketplace of ideas, and Count My Vote made both of those powerful things happen because it gave more people access to the ballot, then the voter has more choice, and then the marketplace of ideas takes over. It's a wonderful thing for our state.
It's an interesting point because for a very long time we had a lot of candidates that were winning by 30 points or more if it was contested at all.
Yeah, we had the most restrictive ballot in the country. There was no choice to the ballot but through the caucus convention system, and we were the only state that had it that restrictive. You can correct me if you see it any differently, Lieutenant Governor, but I believe we definitely needed to modernize, and that has happened. It's not been without a lot of controversy, which continues, but it's overall a part of the equation to getting people to turn out. So you have more competitive elections.
You know, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the high turnout after this election, if there's going to be any backlash to the vote by mail or backlash to same-day voter registration or lawsuits. And I would just tell people out there, be very wary of any candidate or anybody out there that says that they want fewer people to vote to get elected, because that's not the marketplace of ideas, right? We need to compete, and we should encourage more people to vote and then convince them that we're worth voting for.
And even still, helping me with the numbers, but it's less than 50% of the voting age population, even in a big turnout, that show up.
That's correct. Yeah, we get really excited about these numbers, but it's still probably only about half of the people that could vote
are of voting age. And then just to help the listening audience or viewing audience, it's this election, what, about 70%, a little higher than 70% of the registered voters.
Correct.
So two different ways to measure that.
Can we talk about a couple of the hiccups just for a moment, because I'm kind of curious, because I know you're working on those. But one of those was these very long lines in some parts of the state. Maybe talk about how you're looking at that now based on kind of the information you've received and putting all these changes into effect and how it's impacting it.
Yeah, so we knew, especially in Utah County, that's where the longest lines were. We didn't have very many problems anywhere else in the state. And the first time a big county does vote by mail, they overestimate the number of people that will mail them in. A lot of people still like to turn this out. Salt Lake County had the same problem a couple years ago with long lines, so they reduced the number of polling locations and expect everybody to mail them in, and then they don't. And so we warned them that that would happen, and we weren't listened to as much as we would have liked to have been. Plus, we did have historic turnout, which is a very positive thing.
They got a double hit.
Yeah, we had a double hit kind of coming together, and so that will take care of itself. We'll be able to correct that with the new incoming clerk in Utah County. That's the one thing. The bigger thing is people want results immediately, and vote by mail does not lend itself to getting immediate results. It's really the 2-week period, which has always been the case. It's just there are more of those. If you can mail them in the day before the election, we get tens of thousands of ballots after the polls have closed, after Election Day on Wednesday and Thursday, and it just takes longer to do that. We are working for ways to streamline that, and we think we can cut some time off that next time.
Well, go ahead.
The biggest negative I've heard is about the sticker. You know, everybody wants their I voted sticker.
Is that true?
And how expensive it is to put it back in.
It's absolutely true. Like I mean, I knew it was a thing. It's a much bigger thing than I ever expected right now. The crazy thing is it's really expensive to add that sticker into the packet when you're doing it. So we're working on some ways to figure out how to do that, because people definitely want their stickers.
Two reforms you need as the chief election officer: the sticker,
yes,
and then we got to get rid of the straight ticket voting in the state. So my son-in-law is from Arizona. This is his first time voting in Utah. He takes a picture of the straight ticket thing on the ballot and just says, "What is this?" I guess they don't have it in Arizona, I'm assuming.
Yeah, a lot of states have gotten rid of it.
But that just is not in the spirit of what we want to do here, because you want to have thoughtful voting, which requires you to think of each person individually.
Michelle, this issue has come up in Utah a couple of times, even with our legislature about that. So why are we keeping the straight ticket option?
I think the attempts to change the legislation before has made it seem like it's a pro-Republican thing, and so people backed off of that. But I think now that people have seen it affects both parties, it very much in Salt Lake County, it affected Republicans as every Democrat showed up. Good for them.
You.
It did, but good. I'd rather have more, more. I didn't get my message out. Get your message out to everyone. And yeah, I think there's more of a chance that it could be legislated.
And I would just say, just so people know, about 30% of Utahns, both Republicans and Democrats, use that option. They click the box. So it's a really high percent of straight ticket voting in the state.
Seems like democracy's more complicated than that. That's just
well, and especially if you showed up for like medical marijuana and you weren't really familiar with any of the candidates, it's just an easy option, and so I understand why people would do it, but it's not in the spirit.
How would that even be done, Lieutenant Governor, if we decided as a state?
Yeah, it would just take the legislature to change that. And we have, every year since I've been here, there has been a bill run to do that. It was run by Democrats for a long time. A Republican ran it last year. It's never been successful, but maybe this is the year.
Interesting.
It could be. I want to talk for a moment about something our legislature passed, another bill on ranked choice voting. And you've allowed some rule to go forward just this last week. Maybe describe for us what that is, and then we'll talk together about how that might impact elections in the state.
Yeah, so ranked choice voting is a different way to do it. Instead of just voting for the candidate you want, you actually rank the candidates 1, 2, 3, 4. We see this very effectively used in primary campaigns, primary elections, because you may have 5 candidates on the ballot. And then what happens is, if your number 1 choice is eliminated, so they tally them all up and the last person falls off. And if that was your number 1 choice, then they move to your second choice. And that becomes your first choice, and they tally it up again until someone gets a majority of the votes. This is one way to help with the plurality, so somebody doesn't win with 35% of the vote. It's an interesting way to look at it. It takes a little more work to get it all counted up and done right. They're doing it in Maine right now, but what we've done in the state of Utah, the legislature has said we're going to allow municipalities, if they want to try this out and see how it works. So we're excited about it. I will say one of the things that it does is it changes the way people campaign, because instead of tearing down your opponent, you're a little kinder in your interactions and in your media, because you want to be their number 2.
Yeah, you care about 2 and 3.
You don't want to be the enemy to the person who may pick you as number 2.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Natalie.
Well, it's just really interesting, and there is a reason why you do this at the municipal level, because they're nonpartisan elections, and so you get a whole bunch of people on the ballot, and this gets a way to kind of winnow that down.
Well, and it helps as a candidate to win with a majority, as opposed to 35%. You have more of an idea of who supports you and what they're looking for you to do. It's
going to be interesting to watch.
Okay, talk about how the candidates, so you've been a candidate also, so if you have to play to the whole range, I mean, how does that change how you do it? Does this push people to the middle?
Of course.
So,
yeah, and it's probably more expensive for a candidate because, right now they tell you to just forget the ones who love you and forget the ones who hate you and go for the middle. And so you'd kind of have to grow that a little bit, and it'd be more expensive to reach everyone. But I don't think that's a bad thing.
I just want to make a pitch for the productive middle, as I want to call it, and that is to say that if we push things to the middle, that's where real problem solving happens. Because the extremes don't ever get it through. It's in that productive middle where, you take the best ideas from the right, the best ideas from the left, and forge compromise. That's where we function in a democracy, and so this is a positive development.
Where do you see it going?
I think it'll be tried at the local level. I think it'll be successful there. I don't know if it'll go beyond that, though.
It is interesting because we haven't solved the plurality issue that comes from the count my vote in SB 54, and so there is a possibility that this could be the answer. The Republican Party actually tried this several years ago in the caucus convention system. So within the caucus, at the convention, the delegates would show up and they actually did ranked choice voting, and it was interesting to see the candidates say, "Hey, I know you're supporting this guy, but please, could I be your number 2?" There's a lot of that going on.
But we should also just help make sure people understand, with Count My Vote, you don't just have the caucus convention putting out 2 people for you to go to a primary and vote on. You'll have whoever came through the convention, and then you have all the signature people as well. And that's why it becomes an issue, because you'll have 5 or 6 people on a primary ballot. And that's where the ranked choice becomes intriguing there.
What kind of impact could this have on issues that we're working on, like, for example, Proposition 4 on the Independent Redistricting Commission? People in the state have been, they're weighing in on this one. I can't wait to see what happens, right? Still, as of airing of the show,
it's close. It looks like it's gonna pass, but it's very close.
It looks like it's going to. If something like that were to occur and this group was to kind of readjust this line, do you think ranked choice voting would have an impact on those lines? or how we approach kind of just the whole broad spectrum of voting in the state?
You know, I don't know that it would change that quite as much. And I will say Prop 4 is going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. This was kind of the anti-gerrymandering independent commission, because whatever they recommend is non-binding on the legislature. So the legislature can still do what they want. There will, of course, be added political pressure to moderate and maybe not draw the lines in a way that just benefit one party over the other. And I don't know. We may see a legal challenge to this one as well, that this independent commission is messing with their authority.
But just to make it really real to people, one of your colleagues, Jason, pointed out to me that with a different boundary line for the congressional district that is Mia Love and Ben McAdams, if that's just, 2 streets to the north and 2 streets less to the south in Utah County, it could change an election, or vice versa. And that shows you how important those boundaries end up becoming.
I think our numbers are changing anyway because our participation is going up. I think the middle is showing up. Before the past 5 to 10 years, we've had extremes on both sides being really loud and kind of dominating the political climate. And I think people are finally saying, wait, I need to go and vote because what he's saying, I don't agree with that.
One thing that we should also be thinking about in the changing Utah and this inflection point, all that, is the urbanization of the state. So we've always been an urban state for a long, long time and getting more and more urban. But the growth that we're experiencing in the state is very much an urban phenomenon, and that will change the politics as well.
And the Republican Party needs to be very cognizant of that. The U.S. House just got more, on the Republican side, more white males, while on the Democrat side there's more women and more minorities. If the Republican Party doesn't start reaching those people, the demographics moving, they're gonna be going down.
Very interesting point. As we start talking about what we can do to increase participation even more, what I hear from many people, Lieutenant Governor, is technology can make a lot of these things easier. Maybe help us understand what kind of things we can do and what kind of things you've seen. Actually, it sounds like a great idea, but ends up suppressing.
Yeah, so there are a lot of good things. And I think, again, I want to congratulate the legislature, because when a lot of states are trying to make it more difficult for people to vote, Utah's gone the other way and said, we want to make it easier for people to vote.
Same-day registration,
that's right.
vote by mail.
Didn't they run an automatic registration too?
Yeah, there's kind of a hybrid automatic registration when you go to get your driver's license. We're kind of opting you in unless you tell us otherwise. And so again, the legislature did that. That's a really big deal, and I think they've done that. The holy grail out there is electronic voting. That's the one that everybody wants. They say, hey, I bank online. Why can't I do this online? And I say, yeah, you bank online, and how many times have you had to change your credit card because your account got hacked, or you had somebody steal your identity? The problem with voting is, and I'll just lay this out very quickly, but the main problem that we have is we can't audit your vote because you have a constitutional right to a secret ballot. So we can't go back afterwards and say, hey, it says here you voted for Mia Love. We want to make sure that that's true, right? That violates the secret ballot.
Right.
And so the bad guys don't even have to hack an election. They just have to claim they hacked an election. And if you can't prove otherwise, then it undermines the very foundation of our democratic republic. And so there is an answer out there, and it's blockchain technology, which allows us to do that. I won't get into the details of blockchain technology. I know. But West Virginia is doing a pilot project right now with our military voters overseas. This election with blockchain, we'll be reviewing it, see how it worked. It's still several years out, but there is a possibility that we could use that.
Very interesting. And in the last couple minutes we have, I just want to hear from each one of you. And Natalie, start. This high turnout we had in this election, and I think you all have identified all the great reasons why people showed up. How do we keep this going?
Great question. One thing I would look for is candidate recruitment. I think we need to continue to attract people to the ballot, young people, women, minorities. I think that will strengthen the voice of people and make them want to turn out.
I think we need strong parties. I think we need more than one strong party. I think that gets people engaged, and they want to hear two sides of an issue and then decide. And so at least two. I know the UUP wants to come in too, but we need at least two strong parties in the state. I think that'll help.
Has this election, at least we have a couple that we're still watching closely, some local races, but also even the 4th Congressional District. And we've seen the rise of that. We've seen in the 1st Congressional District that Utah United Party at least get up to around 11%. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about? Will that do it, or we see it actually expanding even more?
I don't think it would expand more. I think the existing parties just need to be stronger with their messaging.
But the Republican Party is in the middle of a civil war, and so that could be interesting to see how that plays out. That's a strong word, but it's been that serious, the contention between the pro-count my vote Republicans and the anti-count my vote Republicans, lawsuits, the whole thing. And so, you know, Michelle's got a point there that if the institutions don't respond to the public will will have its say.
That's right. People don't often think that there are problems with supermajorities also.
Yeah.
There are factions within those particular groups. Okay, what's in your broad vision going forward to keep this up? Because it has increased so much.
Well, yeah, no, it has. And the things that they both said, I really appreciate. And those absolutely are the answers. We know that. We've seen the data on it historically and moving forward. I think the key is going to be young people staying involved. I really do. When we talk about low voter turnout, they're the demographic we're talking about. I mean, if you're over 65, 80% are turning out. I mean, it's a very, very high number. And so how do we keep young people engaged? This is a really good start because what we've seen is if you vote once, if you actually get out there, then you're much more likely to vote the next time, and you're much more likely to hold people accountable. And all the things they talked about, those changes, will happen if politicians have to pay attention to people between the ages of 18 and 30. It will look much different here in the state of Utah. And so the best thing that happened to me, I had a kid come up to me and said, "Hey, you're the guy that convinced me to vote for the first time in my life." And he was like 29, you know? And so I'm like, those are the stories we like to hear. That
and
gives
the
me hope for the future.
17-year-olds that can vote if they'll be 18 by, you know, if they get involved in the primary, they're like, "Oh, I can do this now. I'm I'm part of society. I'm an adult."
It's interesting, even when they're getting their learner's permit now, they have a chance to pre-register. That gets them thinking about it.
Yeah.
The last comment there.
Well, I would just like to see one more reform. I would like to see the legislature pass a bill that makes it so once you sign an initiative petition, you can't take your name off. That's what happened to Count My Vote. We would have had another proposition on the ballot, but because people were able to take their name off, it stopped us from being able to vote on that.
Okay, that's going to have to be the last word. Thank you so much for insights. Everyone needs to vote. Thank you for that. That's it for this edition of the Hinckley Report. For more on this week's news, visit us online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you and good night.